Have you ever wondered what could drive an empire to turn a man's death into a carefully staged performance of terror? In the shadow of York's ancient walls, when the night air hung heavy with silence, the fate of one man was twisted into a spectacle meant to haunt every soul who witnessed it. His name was Ewan Macraith, a farmer turned reluctant leader, and his final hours would echo far beyond his broken body. The crowd gathered not out of compassion but curiosity, eager to witness the cruelty of power dressed as justice. Little did they know, they were not simply spectators. They were participants in a theater of dread where the suffering of one would shape the destiny of many. Why would the crown go to such extremes? What secret fear hid beneath the golden throne of King Harold of Albion? Was this punishment for rebellion, or was it fear of an idea that no sword could slay, the idea of freedom? To understand why Ewan's end was crafted with such dreadful care, we must look at the kingdom he stood against. Albion in the 14th century was not merely a land, it was a crown built on hunger and submission. Famine swept across the northern villages, where peasants tilled barren soil while nobles feasted in their castles. Into this despair stepped Ewan Macraith, a man scarred by personal tragedy. His wife and child, lost to the cruelty of tax collectors, became the silent fire that fueled his defiance. He was no knight, no noble. He was a man of the soil, yet he carried the strength of those who had nothing left to lose. When he led a band of farmers against Harold's soldiers and triumphed in a skirmish that should have been impossible, whispers spread across Albion. He was called the Unyielding One, a name that frightened the throne more than swords ever could. Ewan Macraith's defiance was not born of ambition, but of desperation. Yet his victories, small as they were, cut deeply into the pride of King Harold's armies. Each clash where peasants bested armored knights struck fear into the throne, for it proved that power did not solely belong to the privileged. The villagers began to whisper of him not merely as a man, but as a symbol, the Unyielding One. And symbols are far more dangerous than swords. Harold understood this truth too well. A lone rebel could be slain, but an idea that spreads from mouth to mouth, from song to song, is almost impossible to crush. Why would a king fear a farmer more than he feared rival lords? Perhaps because Ewan reminded the oppressed of a truth they were never meant to remember, that the crown ruled only through obedience. It is the same question we might ask today. Why does authority so often fear the voice of the common man more than the armies of foreign foes? But even the strongest flame can be smothered by betrayal. Ewan was not defeated on the battlefield, but in the shadows of loyalty twisted. A childhood friend, lured by promises of gold and land, led Harold's soldiers to the broken monastery where Ewan sought refuge. The night was quiet, the stars hidden, when torches pierced the darkness and chains rattled louder than drums of war. They dragged him from sacred stone halls, his wrists bound in iron, his face lit by the orange glow of fire. Yet his eyes remained steady, not pleading, not trembling. The wound of betrayal cut deeper than any chain, for he had once trusted the man who now delivered him into Harold's hands. The soldiers jeered as they marched him through the streets, parading him as though he were already a corpse. The people stared, some with pity, some with fear, but most with silence. For silence is the first refuge of those who dare not rebel. When Ewan Macraith was brought before the High Court of Albion, the verdict had already been carved into stone. The grand hall, draped in banners of the crown, pretended to echo with justice, but it was nothing more than a stage where truth was shackled as tightly as the accused. The charges rang out in Latin, a language foreign to most who listened, accusations of treason, blasphemy, and rebellion. But Ewan, though beaten and in chains, spoke with a voice that carried over the marble pillars. He declared that he had never sworn fealty to Harold, and thus could not betray him. His words did not tremble, they cut through the silence like a blade. The judges, robed in crimson, exchanged no glances of doubt. They were not there to weigh right against wrong, they were there to dress vengeance in the robes of law. And so the sentence fell. Death, not swift, but slow and merciless. A death designed to frighten a nation into obedience. How many in that hall wondered, even for a fleeting second, whether they were watching justice or simply the crown's theater of cruelty? The day of punishment came, cloaked not in mourning but in spectacle. Stripped of dignity, Ewan was dragged through the crowded streets, the iron of his shackles scraping against cobblestones. Children perched on shoulders, vendors sold wine and bread, and laughter mingled with the anticipation of horror. First, he was hanged until the edge of death blurred his vision, but he was cut down before the embrace of mercy. Then came the knives. His body opened, his very essence laid bare before jeering faces. Flames devoured his entrails while his heart still beat, a cruel reminder that pain could be prolonged beyond imagination. And yet, amidst the screams and agony, some swore that Ewan's gaze never faltered. Could a man, torn apart by cruelty, still defy his oppressors with the silence of his eyes? What was meant to be an execution soon twisted into a grotesque carnival. The streets swelled with voices, hawkers selling roasted meats, children darting between legs, jugglers even performing at the edges of the crowd. It was as if Albion had turned death into entertainment. The king's power was not whispered in fear, but displayed as a spectacle, painted across the very skin of the condemned. The executioners, draped in black, carried out their grim ritual with deliberate slowness. Each act of violence was meant not only to break Ewan, but to remind the crowd who held dominion over their lives. And yet, amid the laughter and drunken cheer, some eyes betrayed unease. Could such cruelty be holy? Could such suffering truly strengthen the crown? The crowd dispersed at dusk, leaving behind the scent of smoke and the memory of screams. But for many, the echo of that day would linger longer than the taste of festival wine. In the villages of Albion, fear spread faster than winter frost. Farmers lowered their voices, mothers silenced their children when they whispered Ewan's name, and entire households bowed lower when tax collectors came. For a time, Harold's crown gleamed brighter, his authority unquestioned. Yet beneath the surface of obedience, something stirred. Though fear held most in place, there were those whose hearts did not bend, but hardened. They carried the memory of Ewan's agony like a secret ember, hidden beneath cloaks of silence. Outwardly, they appeared submissive, but inside, they nursed a quiet rage. The king believed the message had been delivered, that terror had sealed his throne. But terror is a fragile chain. It may bind for a moment, yet it cannot hold forever. The people had seen more than cruelty. They had seen how even the lowliest of men could stand unyielding before the crown. King Harold believed that with Ewan's death, he had struck the final blow against rebellion. But in truth, he had sown a seed. For every man who cowered in fear, another whispered the story of the Unyielding One. His death became a tale retold in taverns, by firesides, and along lonely roads. Years later, a warrior named Duncan the Brave rose from obscurity, carrying a tattered banner said to have once belonged to Ewan. His rebellion was fueled not by riches or ambition, but by the memory of a man who refused to bow, even in the jaws of agony. The king had hoped to erase a symbol. Instead, he had created a martyr whose shadow stretched across generations. And so we ask, does cruelty ever truly silence defiance, or does it only strengthen the very cause it seeks to destroy? History, time and again, offers us examples that answer this question with haunting clarity. Ewan Macraith's body was torn apart, his name condemned in the courts of Albion, yet the crown could not bind his spirit. Over decades, his tale transformed from a grim execution into a song of courage. The peasants who once trembled now sang of the Unyielding One, their voices weaving defiance into the very fabric of Albion's identity. His death became more than history. It became a mirror. It showed the people that power, no matter how cruel, could not crush the will of those who refused to kneel. For some, it was a warning of tyranny. For others, it was a call to arms. In the end, Harold's empire faded, but Ewan's legend endured. His story reminds us that while a crown may claim the body, it can never claim the soul. Freedom, even in its most fragile form, belongs to those willing to bear its cost.